It's a bit of a different one for me, this video, but as you'll see, it does relate to other topics I've discussed before. As I have mentioned before, I used to work at Google, specifically at Google DeepMind, and recently, after being there over 13 years, I left. I'm viewing myself as being kind of semi-retired. I've set myself up as a coach, so by the way, if you're looking for leadership coaching or executive coaching or whatever you call it, check out my website, which is www.scruffyleadership.com. But anyway, I also found myself recently with an itch to create something technical, so I decided to try out vibe coding, which I'd been hearing about. And in case you don't know what vibe coding is, it's just building software by telling an AI what you want it to build. Or perhaps just to be a little bit more literal, it's about giving the AI the vibes you're looking for and hoping it will create something that matches them, I guess. I'll be honest and say I was very pleasantly surprised by my first experiences with vibe coding. Not perfect by any means, but pretty mind-blowing. I wanted to make this video for a few reasons. First of all, I got excited by the whole project and I just wanted to kind of share that excitement with you. Secondly, I wanted to share my thoughts about vibe coding and who it might be useful for. And thirdly, well, honestly, this is going to be kind of a bit of an ad for the tool I developed because I think it's pretty cool and might actually be particularly useful for the people that watch my videos. So I started with an idea, which was that I wanted to build a tool that would let people practice coaching on an AI coachee. So this could be someone like me who's starting out as a professional coach or someone who's learning to be a coach, or it could be anyone in a management or leadership role that uses coaching as a core skill, which everyone should. So I had already played around with this idea of a sort of simulated coaching session before, so I knew it had some promise, but I had not previously really considered building a kind of fully fledged product around it. I used Gemini to do my vibe coding because I'm loyal to Google, and I built my application using PHP, MySQL, JavaScript and HTML because that's the technology stack I've used loads and loads of times over about 20 years. So I'm very comfortable with it. I know it's not trendy and it never was really, but I like it. I should maybe emphasize something. The last time I was a professional software engineer was last millennium in the late 1990s. I have coded quite a few side projects for fun since then, but I consider myself to be woefully out of date, as you can tell by my choice of tech stack perhaps. But this is important because I think there are three categories of users of vibe coding. So first of all, there's experienced professional software engineers who might use vibe coding just to speed up their workflow, for example. Secondly, there's people like me who kind of know enough to be dangerous, but maybe not much more than that. And then finally, there's people who've never done any programming at all, or really just very little. And I'll comment again in this video on those three categories, but let me just say for now that I think it's maybe that second group that is perhaps the sweet spot of people who can really benefit from vibe coding tools right now. So to get going, I told Gemini in pretty rough terms what I wanted it to build, and a few hours later, yes, just a few hours later, I had a working prototype. And a week after that, I had what I consider to be an MVP, a minimum viable product. And I actually started signing up beta testers. I got about 25 beta testers pretty quickly. And the response from those beta testers, reassuringly, was actually really positive, with some extremely helpful constructive feedback, which I have pretty much completely incorporated into the tool now. I've done some of the bug fixing myself, and I've even added a few small features myself, but about 95% of the code was written by Gemini. Going into this process, I had an expectation that working with a vibe coding tool like Gemini for coding would be a bit like having a junior software engineer. So at Google, that might be level 3, for example. So perhaps I would tell it really precisely what I wanted it to do in small pieces, and it would just do that piece and maybe occasionally have some bright ideas about how to go a bit beyond that. But I would still be in kind of overall control. I would be deciding how these things fit together and how to make it into a product. But in reality, it was maybe a bit more like being a product manager, working with a small team of very experienced software engineers, perhaps in the Google scale of things, a level 5, a level 6, and a level 7 altogether. Or maybe actually more accurately, I think, it's a bit like being something like a CEO or a CTO who's working with a product manager and a small team of engineers, and Gemini is all of those people. What I mean by that is I found that I could describe a feature in pretty vague, pretty shallow terms, and Gemini would figure out exactly what I really needed. It would add nice little touches, it would figure out what was actually necessary in order to achieve the goal that I had described. It would come up with, good wording, marketing copy, all of that kind of thing. It would figure out that I would need to worry about security and how to do that sort of thing. And it even designed this web user interface to look kind of nice. It's not mind-blowingly beautiful or original or anything, but still, I think it kind of looks pretty professional, and I'd strongly suspect that where it doesn't look so good, that's because of me getting perhaps too involved, tweaking the CSS and generally fiddling with things where maybe I'd have been better off trusting Gemini with it. The experience was definitely not entirely a positive one. There are bugs in this tool, as I'm sure there are in others. Most frustratingly, Gemini has a habit of eventually getting to a state where it sort of ignores what you just asked it to do, and it goes back to fix some old bug that it already fixed a few iterations ago. Whenever that happens, I basically start a new session with Gemini, upload the code again. This is annoying, but actually I kind of ended up finding that starting a new session is quite helpful for my own sanity anyway, as it keeps things cleaner and clearer in my own mind. And of course, this is annoying right now, but annoyances like this are getting fixed all the time. So it won't be long before that particular bug is fixed, I am sure. The overriding feeling, though, that I got from this vibe coding experience was amazement at the incredible power and capability of this tool. It is so much more creative and grounded than I would have expected. And I've been working in AI for my entire working life, and I've been working at the company that created Gemini for the last 13 years. Even an insider's view doesn't quite prepare you for how far AI technology has come in just the last few years. So what is this tool like that I've built? Well, you can try it out for yourself for free if you like at aipractice.coach. And if you do decide, no pressure, but if you decide you'd like to subscribe to it and you're watching this video before the end of August 2025, you can have an 80% discount forever using the code YouTube80. Anyway, let me sign up for a new account with it so you can see what the experience is like. You can create an account for free, and having created the account, we can log in. And then once we've logged in for the first time, we get this wizard that walks us through how the tool works and how to use it. I won't go through this in much detail. You can pause it and see what it's saying. But I will show you these are the important bits. So we can, first of all, we can choose who are we actually coaching. So the default is you're coaching a junior software engineer. But maybe I want to coach a research director, for example. And then we can choose like how talkative is this person? Well, let's say they're medium talkative, or actually I quite like it when they're fairly terse, they don't say too much. And we can choose how difficult they are. If they're hard, then that means they kind of don't really want to be there and they're not really up for it. Standard is reasonable setting here. And then it explains you can ask for feedback and advice, and you can simulate time jumps and manage various sessions, all that sort of thing. And then we get going, and we get the first intro from the coachee, who says their name is Uma and they want to talk about their recent performance review. So I'm going to say, hi Uma. And the conversation can go on. Perhaps at this stage I'm already a bit unsure what to do. Maybe I'm very new to coaching, so I can ask for advice. And here we go, we get some advice. And actually now I can discuss the advice. Let's say I don't understand what it means by blind spots. There we go, it tells me what it means by blind spots. And eventually, probably doesn't make sense to do it right now, but I'll show it to you. I can ask for feedback as well. So wow, I've already got an A-, that's pretty good. I've got some brief feedback here, and I can ask for some more detailed feedback. It gives me some references to refer to, and again, I can discuss it. Everything that you do in the tool gets stored, and you can go back and look at old sessions. You can rerun the conversation again. So maybe I decide I want to give Uma a chance to say this again, and maybe they'll say it slightly differently this time. So I'll delete from there, and then Uma will carry on from where they got to. And again, I can come in and choose who I want to be coaching, and I can also choose a particular issue that they might be dealing with. So maybe they've been dealing with some team conflict, for example, and I want them to represent that in the coaching session. Okay, so there it is. aipractice.coach, my tool for helping coaches and managers practice their coaching on an AI. I'm honestly actually really happy with it. It's not perfect, of course, and when bugs arise, I often find myself being fairly dependent on Gemini to figure them out. Although, as I'll say in a few minutes, sometimes it's the other way around. But that business of me using Gemini to figure out each bug, honestly, is probably a bit more of a habit at the moment than a necessity. I do know that I could figure most of the bugs out myself, but maybe it would take me an hour to figure out a bug, whereas Gemini might fix it in 5 minutes. But like I said earlier, I have added some small features by hand myself, which has helped me to get more familiar with the code and also to feel a little bit more of a sense of some kind of genuine ownership of this thing that I've co-created with Gemini. So what do I think about vibe coding? I think that, like anything, it's a tool and it can be used in good ways and it can probably be used in very bad ways. I'm not sure how much I would recommend vibe coding for a total beginner. The reason I say that is that unless your project is pretty simple, you eventually reach a point where you need to help the tool figure out what's going on with some of the bugs and things like that. It's not all the time, but sometimes I found that Gemini would just not be able to figure out a bug and I would have to do some debugging of my own. Gemini would then do the final step, fixing the bug, but it does sometimes seem like it can't quite get there without some human help. And if you know nothing at all about coding, then doing that debugging is going to be difficult, maybe quite painful. Perhaps more importantly, though, I do worry about there ending up being a plethora of software out there that no human actually understands. One day that's going to be fine when the AI is really superhuman in its capability. But at the moment, that could be a dangerous thing depending on what the software is being used for. At least with my first two categories, the sort of more experienced engineers, there is a human engineer somewhere in that loop that has at least the capacity to understand the code and deal with issues when they arise. Having said all of that, though, I do love the idea of someone who has never written a single line of code creating something fairly simple, say a game for them and their friends to play, or a tool to help them manage their finances, something like that. For those kinds of things, vibe coding, honestly, it's amazing. So as a simple example of this, I decided I wanted a really simple tool to track coaching clients and prospects. I could have used Salesforce or something like that, but it's so complicated. I just wanted something that did like 3 things. So I described what I wanted to Gemini, and literally half an hour later, I had exactly the tool I had envisaged, with no unnecessary functionality, no clutter, no complexity. And I bet pretty much everyone has some kind of life admin that they have to do, which could be helped by just the right tool. And while there are no doubt expensive, complicated tools that might do the job, most people don't want to be adding that kind of complexity into their lives. So vibe coding could be a pretty useful tool for those people. For experienced engineers, I think vibe coding can be great. For example, one of the things that has surprised me most, actually, is how well Gemini has handled integrating with third-party APIs. I thought I would have to download the documentation for the APIs and give it to Gemini, but no, it just had access to all of that. So I did this in my tool with Stripe, for example, for payments, Gemini, Google's text-to-speech, and even an API for generating live video. All of those were the kinds of things that would be fairly painful for even a pretty experienced engineer if they haven't worked with that particular API before. So I can totally imagine a use case where when you have to work with some new third-party API, which perhaps isn't that well documented, it's quite complex, you just get a tool like Gemini to do the initial integration for you, fix the first few bugs, and then hand it back to you to take from there. One kind of nice example of that for me was with Stripe. If you've ever integrated with Stripe, you'll know that a lot of this integration happens through webhooks, and Stripe has literally hundreds of webhooks. Rather than leaving me to figure out which webhooks I needed to implement handlers for, Gemini picked the 2 or 3 that I really needed and created basically pretty good implementations for them. So there we are, my very early thoughts on vibe coding, having tried it for a few weeks. Let me know if you find this video useful or interesting. I'll perhaps make an update video in a while, and let me know if you have your own experiences with vibe coding. And if you're up for trying out my coaching practicing tool, then please do. I'd love you to do that. All right, thanks for watching. See you. Bye.